the networking aspect of doing these competitions is the reason you do it.
That's it.
We're not at MedTech Actuator Origin for that little bit of money that we could potentially win at the end, because we probably won't. We're there for the networking.
That's it, yeah. The experience, right?
Experience.
The education and the network.
Experience, education, network, the potential nurturing into the accelerator program too next year.
That's it.
But the network is everything.
Welcome back to this episode of the Student Founder Podcast, a platform created for student entrepreneurs to come into the spotlight that they deserve in the Australian market. We're trying to build a community around student entrepreneurship where we bring on experts in business, as well as investors and the entrepreneurs themselves, to talk about their experiences in the startup world. I'm your host, Oliver Kukanik, PhD student by day, student founder by night. And this episode is brought to you by Rofi Labs, software development company started out of University of Melbourne. We help companies build their MVPs, we help companies develop their apps, and of course help companies fulfill their resources using our software development team. If this is something you want to learn more about, reach out to us on LinkedIn and we'll get in touch with you. All right, so we'll get straight into the podcast. Today we have the co-founder of a company, which is very rudimentary, called AcuDent, an early stage startup with an aim of revolutionizing dental care and diagnostics. As a group, the founders of AcuDent have embarked on a journey to create innovative and accurate solutions that will replace traditional tools routinely used in the dental industry. Today, our guest, who has competed in various pitch competitions, will be showcasing one of their latest prototypes on his iPad and talk to us about the process of kickstarting an idea into a business. Having won various industry awards, including the Telstra and Customer and Community Impact Award, introducing to you, Liam Murray.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. It's
No
nice to
worries.
be here.
Some people, when we start up the podcast, they get freaked out with the introduction. Sometimes it's too, quintessential as such, and they freak out.
No, I feel like I've heard too many podcasts at this point. It's just natural. It sounds awesome.
That's it. All right, so we'll get straight into it. I think probably the first thing that we want to do is kind of break down, a little bit about you, Liam. Tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe your academic background, just for the audience to get a bit of an understanding of who you are.
Yeah, for sure. Could go back pretty far, but I think the main things that are really relevant to AcuDent is I'm in my final year, Masters of Biomedical Engineering. I finished my exams in a couple of days. We're just talking about that. And that's come from, so I did a Bachelor of Science at Melbourne as well. Next year, I'm hoping to follow through into a PhD, looking at microbiomechanics.
So have you completed honours?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So just Bachelor, Masters,
and then straight into
PhD.
Yeah. So what? Sorry to cut you off, but I'm curious because I'm doing a PhD, obviously. What kind of project are you looking at starting up?
Yeah, so I'm going to be working in the mechanobiology lab in the Department of Biomedical Engineering, and we are specifically looking at the aging heart, and so how the heart changes in the pathological state and how cells change. And for me in particular, the reason I'm interested in going into this stream and the reason I proposed the PhD that I did is the modeling of cells, modeling how that soft tissue changes, the muscle cells in the heart, and then broader skeletal muscle, how they change in a pathological state versus in their healthy state. I think the application there is incredible in terms of, hey, we're in Victoria, what's our biggest killer? And also just in terms of our broader health movement. It wasn't always my goal. I didn't want to do a PhD. If you'd asked me this 6 months ago, I would have said no.
So what changed? What opportunity arose?
I think two things. One, how successful AcuDent has been, funnily enough.
Yeah, which we'll get into.
Going into a PhD gives me the flexibility to work on that and decide without it being a source of income.
Yeah.
The other thing is I got approached by VJ, who will be my supervisor, and he was talking about bringing together a group of researchers, a group of PhD students, and collaborating on a project to develop AI that could analyze soft tissue, just in general, which is blue sky. But
but it's an idea, right? And you need fundamental minds in the room in order to facilitate something like that.
Exactly. So that's really exciting, especially when, again, AcuDent, we'll get into it, is looking into the state of soft tissue in the mouth. Yeah. It's just two things colliding almost too perfectly for me to not go for it.
No, it's actually really good insight, because I mean, one of the reasons I actually started my PhD was a very similar reason in terms of always being interested in business. Originally, I wanted to be a clinician. Tried to get into medical school. It's very difficult to get into, arduous task. But actually blessed that I wasn't able to get directly in because of the opportunities that arose in the process of actually trying to get there. Once you start a PhD, it is very much you're somewhat in control of your time. And that can be very beneficial when starting and running a business, right? So that's definitely a smart move on your behalf. So I guess tell us a little bit about, I guess, your business or AcuDent and what products you're actually trying to develop.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The exciting stuff.
AcuDent,
just like as fundamental as it comes, accurate dentistry.
Yeah.
The goal here is just to improve dental tools and improve the diagnostic capabilities of things that are done in the dental space.
Yeah.
I think you can think of AcuDent's goals in probably two streams. The first of those is we want to improve the accessibility of healthcare. And then the second is improving what is our current practice.
Yeah.
And our current product, our need is that we're focusing on, and our problem that we're focusing on initially, at least, is the screening of periodontal disease. This is a disease that affects 1 in 3 adults.
Yep.
It's the 6th most common condition globally, and it has some pretty terrible irreversible effects if it's not screened for. So we came into this space, and we've got a dentist on our team, and she introduced us to this problem, and we're like, okay, it's such a problem. Why is no one looking into it? It must be screened for pretty readily, or they must have pretty decent tools. And that's not the case. Periodontal disease, at least in Australia and broadly around the Asia-Pacific region and mostly Europe, is screened for using a tool that was developed in the 1930s.
Right.
So it's extremely outdated.
Yeah.
It's manual, it's time-consuming, and it's just not cost-effective for clinicians. And so they are in the situation where a clinician whose revenue is tied to turning over patients needs to do a procedure to protect their health, but they don't have time to do it because it takes too long.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're taking that tool, we're giving it the 80-year update that it deserves, and giving clinicians the time to do the screening they should be doing.
Interesting. So I guess, it's interesting that you've niched down exactly on a particular type of, oral, I guess, disorder or whatever it may be. But tell me a little bit about the process of actually developing something like that's handheld device, right? Like the actual, I guess, manufacturing of the prototype, the design of the prototype. How did you go about actually formulating that?
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I think when it comes to creating something that's going to be interfacing with a patient and with a clinician, so it's on both sides, there's a lot of considerations. And I think for us, being in a position where we're creating a handheld device that is meant to work into a workflow, not create a new workflow, it's basically just a continual conversation with clinicians. I know that it wasn't our current prototype. It doesn't look anything or function anything like our original ideas, just because we had these amazing ideas to use ultrasound in the mouth or to use different imaging techniques or different types of sensors to do what we're currently doing. But they all required a new technology, something that is vastly different. But through back and forth conversations, we've got partners at the Melbourne Dental School and local periodontists. Going back and forth with them, you find that one, the dental industry is extremely conservative.
In what way?
They don't like to take up new technology.
Okay.
They like to do what they've been trained to do because it takes so long to get there, and so many people in the community do it that they want to stick with their technology and their practice. They think it's right, and they've got every reason to believe that.
Very, very conventional, I guess, pipelines and processes.
Extremely. So if you can't offer them an immediate benefit, then you're not getting into the space. If there's no pressure to uptake it, there's no reason. So developing what we have, the AcuPro device, is it's pretty much just back and forth conversation.
So you're talking with a lot of people in the industry to get insight as to the development of a tool that they would actually use, is what you're saying?
Yeah, 100%. Again, benefit of having a dentist on our team is we do have a lot of connections in that community.
Insight, yeah.
So we've been able to survey people, find out what they're doing and what they're not doing. We've been able to talk with periodontists and see how they are conducting their practices.
Sure.
Lots of conversation.
Yeah. So going back to the original question, the actual design itself, who designed the tool, and how many, I guess, iterations and prototypes did you go through before you kind of, stuck your guns into one particular one in focus?
For sure. I'll show you.
Yeah, sure.
So I'll give you a bit of an image here so you can have a look. This is just an excerpt
just
from the
flip it
report.
around the camera over there.
Oh. You see that?
Can you see that, Eddie? Yeah.
Brilliant. Sugar.
No, you're right.
So, our current prototype is literally just a device attached to a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah. So Raspberry Pi is like a small computer, essentially.
Exactly. How we got to this form is there's probably two main characters in our group who have been able to get us there. Ivy, who's one of the other biomedical engineers and she works at CSL, has quite a bit of experience with hardware.
Yeah.
She's done a bit during her engineering time at the University of Melbourne. And then we've got an industrial engineer on our team too. So Aaron, who's also one of our MBA students, has quite a bit of experience with CAD.
Yeah.
So through the conversations with periodontists that we were talking about earlier, we knew that we needed a device that had a similar form to the current probe, which we can see here just attached pretty horrendously with some elastic bands to a highlighter.
It's a start, right?
Exactly. It had to have a similar form.
Yeah.
But then every other decision about its shape were decisions made off what it required. So it needs space to house a PCB.
Sure.
A printed circuit board.
Okay, yeah.
That's it. Inside its body to do some of the electrical and processing requirements. It needs somewhere to put on an optic so that we can actually take images.
So this is a 3D print. The one on the right, the orange one, is a 3D printed device.
Yeah, so this one's our 3D mock-up so that we can hand it out to people at pitches.
And what feedback have you had so far in terms of the feel?
Shape is good.
Shape is good.
So in its current shape, obviously being a 3D print, it's not heavy. It's very similar form to what we would ideally have. So there's not issues there. But that's almost not beneficial for us to hear.
Yeah.
Our other device, this terrible little contraption here, that has been used. So it's been used in a mouth.
Okay.
Anna's been able to test it on herself.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which, don't do that at home. Don't put electronics in your mouth. But we've got a trained dentist, and she's been able to use it in her mouth and take measurements. Even in its horrendous state here, we've got function.
Yeah. Which is the idea of the prototype, right?
Exactly.
You want to test functionality.
Exactly. So we've got functional prototype and then pretty shape prototype, and then we've got some mock-ups here for what we want.
Sure. So in terms of, thanks for showing that, I appreciate it. In terms of process of manufacturing, when you actually, finalize your design and compact it into the proper handheld, device you want to develop, have you thought about how you may scale up manufacturing?
Yeah. So in two ways, there's two big considerations here of scalability. I work at SEER Medical, so I've seen scalability problems firsthand, and that's why they manufacture internally. Obviously, with a device that we project will be regulated around Class 2, it's minimally invasive, but it is interfacing with skin and it's inside your mouth and potentially blood. So everything needs to be able to be sanitized, sterilized. Everything needs to be biocompatible in terms of the materials. So looking at like CNC molding for like stainless steel for device shape. Another consideration though is the expense. So our device immediately going straight into the market with our initial projections around 2026 is going to be more expensive than what we want it to be down the line.
Yeah, sure.
Because
it always works like that. When you scale, things should get cheaper.
100%. And that is just because we're creating a unique mold to begin with. And then the scalability thing for us then is being able to drop the price because we're making more and more of the pieces and having that price drop from the consumer end. We've also got more money to spend on getting more and more out. It's a relatively simple device. So there's not any huge concerns in terms of how can you make this technically feasible at a large scale, or what are the quality issues.
It's a very niche product almost, right? Like dentists are going to be using this. Doesn't need to be for every single human on earth. And
exactly. So it needs to be tailored for that space. But then it's also worth considering that the AcuProbe, it's got two parts. So it's got the body and then it's got a disposable head. So those need to be manufactured separately. Because they've got different lifespans.
Interesting. Okay, so you've created a prototype to some degree, and you're working through the processes now of thinking about and finalizing that design. How beneficial for a startup is it to actually have developed a prototype when you're talking to potential customers or investors? Has it helped you out a lot?
Without question, it is probably the most beneficial thing that we've experienced. I think
because it's very different to saying like, oh, like with this company and these are our total viable market, all this other stuff, and then we haven't developed a prototype. Whereas when you actually give someone a device to hold, they're holding it. Oh wow, you created this, you designed this. It's impressive, right? There's a different feel to that environment.
Yeah, completely. And we'll go on a bit later on like team success and cultural sort of stuff. But I think one of our biggest successes with grants that we've won or pitching events is just the feasibility of holding something. I like you're saying, and to bounce right off that, I think as people, we like to think that we've got a good imagination, or we're good at conceptualizing an idea when it's talked to us.
Of course.
But we're not.
We're
not. It's like...
And everybody has a subjective imagination.
100%.
So you describe something to me versus, 7 other people, and we may all think of it in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. So even having this conversation, you've seen our device at a booth. Other people are going to see it on the screen, and your idea of what it is versus what their idea is, they're completely different. Holding it in your hand changes your perspective and it helps immensely.
Exactly. That's a good point. That's really good. You've thought about all that and you've kind of gotten through that stage of the business so far. I want to jump back a step and just ask you a question about your education and kind of ask you how that kind of persuaded you or invested you into jumping into the startup space, because it's not necessarily a conventional pipeline from where you came from. Have you always been interested in startups?
No. I wasn't even interested in biomedical engineering, if I was going to be completely honest. Like,
that's all right.
I always tell people, they're like, why are you in the stream that you're in? I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's because biomedical engineering was the closest I was going to get to being Iron Man. But
it's a good start.
Definitely. I don't think I even, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, just before COVID, knew what a startup really was, especially a MedTech one. I think that those seeds were planted for me. There's a subject in our course called, what's it called? Biotech design or something like that. It's ran by a guy called Sam John. And then there's a follow-up subject called bioinstrumentation. And it was during that period and those two subjects where you make a physical device. I remember making an EMG on a breadboard.
Right.
And when you have that first experience of you've created something and it does what you want it to do, that ownership, especially as an engineer, is just encouraging. It's motivating. So then couple that with, right at the beginning of COVID, I heard about a company called Sim Medical.
They're just outside.
Just outside, just down the road. And it was during that time that I was looking for internships and looking for jobs. I ended up shooting a message through to Sim Medical, their HR person. A couple of weeks later, a few interviews, and I've now been working there for nearly 2 years.
Yeah, that's good.
And there has been no experience that's made me love the startup world more than being in a startup. Obviously, I'm biased. It's extremely successful.
Yeah, but I think also, like, you're very much right. You won't know if you like it until you try it. And jumping into something that kind of is already existing but at a very rudimentary phase, there's a lot to learn, and it's a very fast-paced environment because things need to be moved forward quite fast and promptly.
Completely. And I think it's that fast-pacedness that you'd have to agree with me. You're in the space. There's something about that fast-paced movement, that networking, that idea development. It's tantalizing.
Yeah, it makes you feel alive.
Yeah, it makes you feel alive.
Yeah, like there's nothing better than getting on stage and pitching.
Oh, with that question, that's
because it's obviously like it's an intimidating thing as such. Like many people are scared of public speaking, but it's not so much the pre-phase to getting up on stage, but the feeling after you've completed it and you get the good feedback from the crowd that people actually like your ideas. Right? That's a good feeling.
It's elation. Yeah. And I do think the startup world just inherently it plays into it tickles that little bit of like risk in you, that like desire
for those of us who like it.
100%. And it's not for everyone, and that's fine. And I think there's a benefit to being younger in this space too, because you've got a little bit less responsibilities and such.
Well, it's easier to take risks when you're younger.
Oh, without question. But yeah, so that's me in a startup. I got the bite. I'm getting a little bit more nibbles now, and now I'm going for the whole plate.
Well, it's a good advice for the people watching who are interested in startups who maybe don't have the best idea as such. Maybe they're not so imaginative, but they're interested in the startup space. Go work for go do an internship at a startup. Like you'll learn so much in that process. It's so valuable for your education.
Yeah,
you learn probably more hands-on in a business than you would in a university course.
Oh,
like
no
question. Not even
no
a question. Right?
Yeah.
And the same goes for me. Like for whether it's the business I started or even during honours, for example, where I did my first research project and wrote my first thesis. That experience was far more educational than my whole 3-year undergraduate degree, despite it only being 8 months long. So that just shows you the power of actually being there physically, talking to people in that space and that environment. So that's really good. Now, look, you mentioned you have a team behind AcuDent, right? So I'm curious to, I guess, hear your perspective on how you came about creating the team, how many people are in the team, and, I guess how that team dynamic in your business is working.
Yeah. So our team and the creation of our team is unique. It's unique to the biodesign innovation course because unlike most startups, the healthy thing is you have an idea and you bring people together. In the biodesign innovation course, which is our capstone in the biomedical engineering department, you have a team and then you find an idea. So it's the reverse. It's not how it should be. And that team forming stage happens in like the first couple of weeks. And it's literally just you're in a room with it's like 30 biomedical engineers and 20 or 15 or something like that business students. And it's just 2 weeks of having a coffee with someone new every single day, 2-3 times, and trying to figure out as quickly as possible, do your personalities match? Do your goals match? All right, let's do something. And that's how it happened for AcuDent. I was lucky because Aaron, who's functioning as our CEO at the moment, he's also got a relationship with SEER Medical. So I had no connection with him earlier, but he saw resume, I'm working at SEER, and he jumped on me immediately as a partner. And then from there, the two of us were just looking for others. And so we've then got Ivy and Ashwin, who are biomedical engineers. They're still studying, graduating next year. And then Anna, who's our dentist and also an MBA student.
So quite a diverse team.
Very diverse, large for a startup. But I think it's our culture that's really been the bread and butter of everything we've done. We weren't going to go into the dental space initially, even if we did have a dentist, but we sort of worked our way back there, and having that clinician on the side as part of your team is...
So did you define the team before the idea?
Yes.
And then you found a problem and then went in to try and solve it.
100%. And do I recommend that to anyone? No, don't find a team before the idea. That's not
it's fine. Like it's probably less conventional, but it can definitely have its uses.
It 100% can have its uses, and I think one benefit of it is that we came together and the goal was to form a team first. So we formed a team. We had great culture. We're still developing that culture. It takes hits all the time, but the goal at first was just having a team. And when you can nurture that, there are repercussions that are brilliant.
Absolutely. All right. I'm reading a book at the moment. It's called The Unfair Advantage. I don't know if you've heard of it, but essentially it looks into this ideology or idea that describes someone's luck versus acumen to achieve certain things, or even just effort required for certain things, and that plays a fundamental role in someone's potential success, right? So it's considered an unfair advantage. I think one of the examples he used right at the start of the book is the co-founder of Snapchat, right? He was like Evan Spiegel or something, who came from a very rich and wealthy family, right? Which is, some people would consider it to be, lucky, but in some degree, there are a lot of rich people who don't make anything of it, right? So that's his unfair advantage. He took advantage of that situation, the wealth, the affluent parents who had the connections to create Snapchat to what it is today. Very, I guess, widely known social media platform. So my question is to you, it's a bit of a novelty question, but what do you think your unfair advantage is?
Oh, what's my unfair advantage? That's a brilliant question. To first, just to answer, luck, acumen, effort. I like to think that there's no such thing as luck.
Sure.
That's such an answer.
It's fair enough.
It's such a common answer.
Yeah.
But if you did the pie chart, it's 100%, only 10%. Well, of course it's 100%, it's a pie chart. But 10% of it's luck and the rest is split 50-50 with the acumen and the effort 100%.
Sorry to put you on the spot like this,
What is
while you're thinking, it's interesting you say that I guess luck doesn't have a large part and play in that, because the only reason I say that is they describe that exact mentality in the book, that people don't think there's luck, right? And I had the same perspective as you entering into reading the book, and then they described all the examples of people being born in certain areas at certain times, during certain eras where things were changing in their environment. And if they hadn't been born in that environment, well, yeah, sure, they put a lot of effort, because effort is a necessity for success. But if they hadn't been born in that exact moment on Earth, it wouldn't have happened the way it did. So an example is something like Nintendo, right? So I think, it was Nintendo. During the very rudimentary development of that company as such, it was at a time where there wasn't a big, I guess, allowance for a lot of gaming platforms and things like that in Japan. It was associated with gambling and there was a lot of restrictions on it. However, when the founder kind of came up with the idea, it was when those policies were being alleviated and he saw the opportunity to jump right into it. So if he hadn't been born at that time where he had the expertise at that exact moment, maybe Nintendo or the ideas from Nintendo wouldn't have been a thing.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept. It's obviously up for conjecture and debate, but
No, yeah, completely. I think there's a lot of merit to, at least there's a lot of humility in the belief of luck too, which I think is fantastic.
Of course.
I think for the reason I say that luck, if anything, is 10%, is because I feel like you take some of the most successful and most brilliant people in whatever regard. It doesn't have to be wealth or status. And I feel like you put them into different situations and the perspective that takes them out of it, regardless of what that situation is.
Absolutely.
So maybe they might not have been as successful if they were born a year later, or if they hadn't met that one random person on a train on that one random day. But, I think it's the perspective that drives, and that's going to roll into what do I think the unfair advantage is? Perspective. I think I'm lucky enough to be in a situation or have the people around me or I've had the experiences that I've got a positive perspective. And I don't think that can be understated enough, because everyone in our team throughout the entire year, we've all struggled. We've all had flaws. We've all had waning motivation. But it's your perspective that really matters. For example, the first pitch we ever gave, I did horribly.
It happens.
It was so bad. And I've always had this ego when it comes to pitching, because the first half of my life I spent doing speech therapy. So I was never a public speaker. Really struggled to speak. And so when I did that first pitch with a team and it really mattered and I screwed it up and it was abhorrent, there was such a kick in the gut. But it was such a necessity at the same time. 100% a necessity. And having the perspective within the team of, hey, no, give it another shot. Or their perspectives that they could still back me to try it again. And now look where it's gotten us, at least so far. we've been lucky.
Yeah.
But
You've made good strides.
I think, perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think perspective is pretty much, can amount to anything. If you have the humility to recognize your surroundings, you can gain so much experience from, the world around you. And that is all perspective, and it all helps in anything that you do, whether it's a business or just in a general career or whatever it may be. Absolutely. So let's switch gears a bit. We'll go into a different part, section 2, kind of talking a little bit more about pitching and development of the idea. So we'll start off by me just asking you a question. How did you actually, and you've touched on this briefly, but identify a gap in the market for your product? So you said there was some iterations over time where you kind of switched up into a little bit more of a niche area of dentistry. How did you actually define that problem? And that was something that you kind of wanted to create a solution for?
Yeah, for sure. Again, simple answer is conversations. Long answer is we didn't know this was an area at first. When we started in the dental space, we all went off our immediate sort of experiences, and we were actually going to look at better ways of isolating moisture in the mouth during fillings. So if you've ever had a filling, you might know that they put a rubber dam in your mouth, and it had a few, and it's extremely uncomfortable. So we were going down that sort of space immediately. But we found that even though the rubber dam, it's unideal and it has a lot of negatives attached to it, the alternatives just aren't that much better.
Sure.
And so improving upon it, it's just, again, conservative dental industry. That was about halfway through the year. So at this point, we're struggling with biodesign. We need to have an idea. So we went back to have conversations, and instead of coming in with, what do you think of this idea? We changed our approach. It was now, just talk us through your day. What's going on? What are you doing? What are you not doing? And Anna, our dentist with a million connections with Periodontics Institute, the Australian, it's like the Australian Society of Periodontology, I think.
Sure.
We had a few chance interviews with people who then mentioned stuff about screening, or we got to see in person screening occurring. And then Anna herself, being someone who does periodontal screening, had her own experience, so it was just sort of confounding on itself. That's how we came to the issue, and I don't think we realized how much of an issue it was at the beginning. I think it was only when we stumbled across it and then thought, all right, let's put it on the back burner, let's try, and then thought about the technology, and then realized, hey, okay, why are they using this tool that's 80 years old? Why is it taking so long? And why are more than 50% of dentists not doing it in the first place?
Sure.
It was sort of going down that rabbit hole, but it all started by just asking the right questions.
There you go, yeah. Okay, so I guess after you define your problem, a struggle that a lot of startups have is actually validating that idea, like really getting to understand if this is something that people need, right? So I guess you've touched on it slightly, but talking to people is obviously a good way of determining and validating that idea. Is there anything else that you did during that process, or I guess people you spoke to open your eyes to, really understand the potential of this product?
Yeah, definitely. I think, talking's great. And it's a good initial validation, but again, sort of from what we were mentioning before, conceptualizing something just based off conversations is hard. So I think there are two main validation points. The first was actually using the device, and this one came later, but it was using the device in vivo. So when Anna used it on herself. When we
in vivo is in people, or in animals or whatever.
So using that in that environment and seeing that it worked, that's about as good of validation as we can get with the current device. And it did, so that was fantastic. I think the second set of validation, though, was actually just through negatives. Going into conversations and into clinics and into that environment and asking them questions and them telling us what was wrong with it.
That's it.
So it was validation through the opposite, through the negatives, through what it's not. And those were better. They were harder conversations to have. And when you're trying to do something, especially when there's an assessment task tied to it uniquely in biodesign, it's not great to hear, hey, this is wrong with it, this is wrong with it, or that doesn't work. Like our early idea, the Acu Sound, which became the Acu Probe. But that was a validation for us, finding what we needed to do so that we weren't getting those negative responses.
Sure. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So I guess our origin story of how we met, I just want to touch on because it's actually quite funny.
Yeah.
And it's how I meet a lot of people, of course. I like to do pitch competitions, not so much for like actually being necessarily successful and going all the way and winning a competition, but the education that you get through the process of pitching and getting that education for free. Now, we actually met because we competed against each other in what's called the MedTech Actuator Origin, which, for those of you who are watching, is a highly competitive accelerator for startups in the biotech and medtech space. So it's essentially designed to help early stage startups, get into an accelerator program to help kickstart them, get funding, etc. Now, both Liam and I were fortunate enough to get into the semi-finals, which was good because we went through intense workshops for a week, pressure tested our ideas, and we were both able to get into the semi-finals and compete on stage in front of probably 100 people or plus. Yeah. I just want to talk to you a little bit about that experience because I feel like there's an inherent benefit of putting yourself in discomfort and going out there and doing these pitch competitions despite knowing you may be competing with people from Japan even or like some huge innovators or something like that. So tell us a little bit about your experience with that and maybe something that you learned from that experience.
Yeah, for sure. I think that my very, very first comment is coming at, I'm 23, walking into a room with all of these other medtech startup founders at Stone and Chalk on King Street. I don't think I've ever been more intimidated. Genuinely, like there's people from all different ages at all different stages.
Yeah.
And I'm a 23-year-old founder who's just been going for a year. Yeah. Completely and utterly intimidating. So I think almost the best part of the experience was that's how I felt on day one. And then on day 3, I'm competing in the second round of the pitching against some of the other ideas and we're being successful. And I think that changes your perspective. Yeah. So again, it all comes back to the perspective. But learning from each of them, getting their feedback on me, getting their feedback on the idea in a space where they had no reason to understand it, that was brilliant. Yeah. Because we're in university half the time, or in the research or the educational tertiary world. When you're there with an idea, there's this inherent understanding of what the tech could be or your pathways because people have experience. Yeah. But then going into a different environment where there's no requirement for them to understand it, or there's no reason that they should have any background in it, and then hearing their feedback, it's a completely different ballpark and it's so brilliant. Yeah. Because you get random people from different irks of the planet telling you, oh, why'd you do this? Or why are you saying it like that? Yeah. Or why does your pitch slide look like this?
It's all judgment, yeah. But it's all constructive judgment.
All constructive. Yeah. The environment was fantastic. It was extremely positive. It was people bouncing off each other. And even like at that pitch night on the Thursday, there was nothing but positivity.
Which is good, yeah.
It was just people helping each other out or asking questions or congratulating another person. The experience was fantastic.
Yeah. So have you competed in a lot of other competitions?
That was our first external. We've done a lot
from the university.
External completely from the university. Yeah. We've done quite a bit internal. Done quite a bit of internal pitching, whether that's for assessments or for Endeavour, the engineering sort of day of showcase. Yeah. So we've done a lot of pitching, but it was all internal. It was always sort of in a safe environment. Yeah. Whereas this was to a crowd of people I have no idea.
Yeah, this was quite different to anything I've experienced personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it was fantastic, and we get to go on to the next stage and pitch again in a bigger room with more and more people.
Yeah, that's it.
So it's intimidating, but as you were saying before, that feeling afterwards, it's worth it.
It's worth it, yeah. I mean, I didn't even say that to the people watching. You did end up getting into the finals, which is an awesome achievement for your sake and your company's, I guess, trajectory forward, which is really good. So you've pitched your idea a couple of times. What experience did you have learning how to put a pitch together, and how important is that, do you think, for a startup?
Yeah, extremely important. Well, it's almost unfortunate how important it is because your pitch, like it's a pitch, and especially in the MedTech Actuator setting, there was no Q&A. So you could really go up there and you could say whatever. But it's unfortunately important because it's like the cover of a book, especially if this is the first time anyone's seeing it. We all say we don't judge a book by its cover, but 100% we do.
It's the first thing you see.
Exactly. So I think it's extremely important. My experience, I've got a lot of public speaking experience, but this was the first time with AcuDent having any pitching experience. And those are two different parts. I feel like the pitch comes from the content and the presentation. You can be really good at one and not the other, and it won't work.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the pitches that I've seen in these competitions, you have someone who is a phenomenal public speaker, but their pitch slides are very, I guess, arduously laid out. They're hard to follow, right? Too much content, too little content. It's misleading, etc. Or you have it the other way around. You have someone who's just like an artist when it comes to putting together a pitch deck. But then, unfortunately, they're not blessed with the ability to stand up on stage with confidence and produce a pitch that's concise and understandable.
100%. And I think the reason we've been reasonably successful so far is because we have that combination of skills in the team. So the first couple pitches that I did that went well earlier in the year, I wrote the script and I presented them. All good and dandy, not great. When I learned that my public speaking skills could only take me this far and the rest needed to be the content and the slides, and then I could bring in the other people in my team to have impact on that, that took us to the next level. So just a shout out, Anna again, our dentist, who's also a graphic designer.
There you go.
So
it's always good to have someone who's handy.
Oh, 100%. So she was designing the slides. She makes pitch decks for a little side hustle. And then I had everyone else on the team helping me write out the script.
That's good. That's perfect. So it's a good, I guess, process to have set up. You delegate tasks to different people and then culminate it all together to create like this awesome pitch.
Yeah. And
sorry, you go.
No, I was just going to say, I think the initial perspective on pitching is it's a one-person job.
Yeah, it's definitely not a team job. Yeah. There's so many things that happen behind the scenes. Like even for Ben and I, when we did the competition, I mean, it was just us two on the idea for that idea that we had OncoSure. And we basically were just sitting in a room overnight creating this pitch, and there was just so much collaboration. We wouldn't have been able to do it alone, essentially.
Exactly. So, it wouldn't have been as fun alone.
Yeah, of course. It would have been horrible. It would have been a task, right? Like almost a duty to complete. So what was I going to ask you next? I was going to say, what do you think some of the pitfalls are for some of the pitfalls that you've seen people fall into when pitching?
I think, not to reiterate too much, but I think focusing too much on one of those two elements, whether it's the content or the presentation, and not nurturing both.
Sure.
Because again, one being fantastic and the other failing will result in a bad pitch. I think... Well, not even a bad pitch, just a not as successful pitch. I think it's a shame, but that first sentence is so important. I think how you rope people into your idea, and that was one of the biggest pieces of feedback we've got going into the next stage of the competition, is we could probably fix the way that we're presenting the problem, which is fantastic feedback, and it's completely right. Because that first 30 seconds... in a 3-minute pitch, or that first 10 seconds in a 1-minute pitch.
Well, most people in the room are thinking, how does this affect me?
Yeah, 100%. We're all inherently a little bit selfish in that, right? And as we should be, care about our health. But I think those are probably my two biggest pitfalls. One is not nurturing both sides of the pitch, the content and the presentation. And then the second is not recognizing how important that first little snippet, and also the last. Because our attention, it's pretty much like a cosine wave. You are completely up here to attend for that first little bit, and then at the end you're like, oh cool, it's ending, and you're back.
Yeah, exactly.
But that middle bit...
Well, the middle bit's just content for context.
Yeah.
Right? And the start is like the captivator, like, okay, I'm listening.
Yep.
The middle's like, okay, I understand the product. And then the end's like, oh, I'm going to remember that now.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the mindset you need.
Yeah,
when
definitely.
writing it even.
That's a really good way of doing it. Yeah, agreed.
Exactly. So how did these competitions, and I guess you putting yourself out there and exposing yourself and your idea, AcuDent, help with networking? And what do you think the importance is of networking for a startup?
Okay, I can answer that very simply, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for it.
That's exactly right.
And I think this is like the fruits of the labour. I think that's the reason you do these events.
Yeah.
It's to meet people who will then offer you opportunities
That's
or
it.
offer you exposure or add their little bit of tidbit here or there. And just even coming out of MedTech Actuator, the network has expanded like crazy.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'm spending too much time on LinkedIn, 100%, but
It is a distracting app, isn't it?
It's so distracting. It's
So
horrible.
distracting.
I need to put a time limit or something.
Well, my business partner did. He put a time limit on it because he can't control himself.
It's too bad. The notifications are horrendous, but it's also just such a game, and it's the networking aspect of doing these competitions is the reason you do it. Like,
That's it.
We're not at MedTech Actuator Origin for that little bit of money that we could potentially win at the end, because we probably won't. We're there for the networking.
That's it, yeah. The experience, right?
Experience.
The education and the network.
Experience, education, network, the potential nurturing into the accelerator program too next year.
That's it.
But the network is everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a lot of people, they probably go into pitch competitions with that mentality that they want to win, which is obviously a good motivator because everybody wants to win. It feels good to win. It pays off for all your efforts, right? But at the same time, the two things, the education that you get out of these competitions is phenomenal because it's the real world, right? Like the MedTech Actuator isn't a university-run startup community. It's external and it's the real world with real people who have started real companies, right? The second thing is the network that you build, right? So if you have access to a network, despite if you win or not, you just need to pull a couple of strings and have a couple of conversations, and you're probably one person away from knowing a venture capitalist who goes, oh, why don't you just join this VC like pitch night? And then you get into a program and, next thing you know, a couple months down the track, you're raising capital for your startup. It's literally like, that is the potential of networking.
Oh, yeah, completely. And it's also, like, when it comes down to it, it's how you present yourself to your network. Because, let's take away, let's say, person X and person Y. Comes out of MedTech Actuator semi-finals. One goes through, one doesn't. And then goes on to LinkedIn, and the one who doesn't, they now make a post to all their network talking about their experience, and the one who did doesn't say anything. It's the one who didn't make it but made the post who's doing better.
Well, that's it,
because it's their network. It's how they're displaying themselves. It's the connections they're now making, which are fundamentally more important. People are power.
That's it. That actually is a good point because it leads into a question I wanted to ask you, which is the idea that a lot of these like actuators and pitch competitions, like we said, they're good networking, good educational opportunities for people in the startup world. However, a lot of the participants, particularly those who win, don't actually, or maybe not the MedTech Actuator, but some of the smaller pitch competitions, let's say, don't actually end up, moving forward with their idea very much, right? In fact, it's actually some of the people who get left behind who, it's almost like that the origin story. They're like, oh, we lost this competition, we lost that competition. We have to prove everyone wrong now by, pushing forward with our idea. I think personally, one of the reasons that some of the winners of these like smaller pitch competitions in particular, the people that end up developing their idea, is because it's simply like a monetary prize. There's just money on the line. And I don't feel like money alone is enough of a motivator to keep someone in this game like moving forward. There has to be more to it.
Yeah, completely. It's also just because as you'd understand in the startup world, that money is so unfeasible. Like a lot of your value isn't physical cash. It's not liquid. And it's not something that you're seeing often. Like we've won a couple grants and I've seen none of that money so far. Only some of it start to trickle through. And so there's got to be another motivator, or there's got to be something else that's keeping you accountable. And so that's a really good way of putting it. If you don't have that motivator being your network, or being connections, or being something else that's pushing you along that monetary goal, it's not going to do much.
That's it. I mean, I was talking with the boys in Rofi Labs, and we were just thinking of, wouldn't it be interesting to run a pitch competition, somewhat of a novelty pitch competition that's like the most simple development, something that's really feasible and impactful. If you had a competition like that, the person who wins actually gets their product developed in like a 1 month sprint, right? Because then that way you're not just giving them money, you're actually like pushing them forward, right? Like by developing their first MVP or something like that. What do you think of something like that? Do you think it would be useful? Do you think a lot of people would, a lot of people would compete because it's an opportunity to get something developed.
Yeah. So obviously you'd mentioned this to me before, and so I've mulled on it a little bit. And I think it plays into what I'd say is potentially one of our biggest motivators for success currently, which is motivation and momentum. So when you do an event, if that's the end, then there's no success. Regardless of what you come out of, whether that's a little bit of money or not, there's no success. You need momentum. We've been lucky because we've been on this like 2-week fortnightly, so something's happened, moving on. That's what I like about the idea. I like that
it creates impetus to push forward.
100%. There's impulse. There's reason to keep moving.
That's it.
It's milestone to milestone rather than milestone. Okay, we're done.
It's kind of like anything in life, right? Like even people, watching this podcast, even a lot of them are uni students. You finish your university degree and you get your papers, but then you kind of get depressed. You're like, oh, well, what do I do now? Right? Like, oh, I've worked up all this, all this effort and, and now I'm here and it's like, oh, I'm here, I'm at the top, but you're not. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, what do I do now? Because now I have to fill in my spare time with something, some type of responsibility.
I think that's almost why I'm doing the PhD. It's just
I did a TEDx talk through UniMelb on this topic of voluntary discomfort. And it relates to that idea that if you're just working towards the end, you're going to lose momentum because it's actually not the process of acquiring the achievement that satisfies you. It's being part of that process and engaging in those troublesome tasks that actually motivate you to keep moving forward, right? So in this case, in a pitch competition where, okay, I've won, now I've been given the opportunity to develop my MVP, I have to do something with that product now. I can't just go and blow my money on, Nobu or whatever you want to spend your money on, right? I think that we should push forward with that idea. I think it'll be a good opportunity for a lot of startup founders out there.
Yeah, I think so. And ultimately, even if for some reason the idea doesn't work in reality, it's just another opportunity to network.
Yeah, of course. It's still a good opportunity for people involved and even for our company and traction that we get through it. Now, I want to jump back to your idea, AcuDent, because you mentioned at the start a little bit about your product eventually integrating some type of AI, right? To make, I guess, judgment about the oral cavity. So tell us a little bit about, how you're starting to develop some of these very fundamental codes and what platforms maybe you're using during that process, if you're aware of it.
Yeah. So I'm luckily aware because I've done the majority of the initial development. So software at AcuDent has been run by 2 figureheads, myself and Ashwin. We've both got experience in quite a few different languages. Myself in JavaScript, MATLAB and Python. And then Ashwin a little bit in Python, but mostly MATLAB coding. Did some stuff with KPMG and I've done some with SEA. So the AI that we've been developing, it's very much, I'd say that it's not where we want to end up with, because the algorithms that we're using, I'll be very intentionally delicate with my language here, but the approaches that we're taking are based off experiences that we've had at university or at work. So and we're not software engineers. So as biomedical engineers, we get experience with creating algorithms and writing software scripts and achieving goals with them. But it's like you're given a slice of pie and you're like, what can you do with that pie, rather than looking at everything else. So it's important to us going down the track that we do recruit, and we've had this conversation a little bit, especially for Rofi Labs and what you guys can offer, but recruit software engineers and people who really know what they're doing with AI.
I mean, it's like some people, like what we were speaking about, the idea of what startup founders like to do, particularly people who are needing some type of software developers. They become somewhat vulnerable as a startup founder because of the finances that they have. Software developers in Australia in particular are costly, right? So they try to go overseas and get a developer. But the person who's overseas as a developer doesn't necessarily have the same cultural backgrounds, communication, that you're expecting an Australian developer to have. That's kind of why we created our company, Rofi Labs, because it fulfills a gap in the communication that you would expect in having a high quality developer. Because there's plenty of talent out there, but having someone as a mediator of those conversations to help project manage is so fundamentally important.
Yeah, completely. So I think you've spotted that very well. But I think the main way that you'd visualize or you'd think about the AI development that's going on at AcuDent is it's being powered by biomedical engineers so that we can get it to a stage where someone who knows what they're doing can take over.
But it's good that you have that solid foundation. Because you, with your experiences, understand the nomenclature used in that field. You may not be a software developer, but having the background of understanding rudimentary code and understanding the conversations of how to iterate in that process is so important when you are starting a business.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're almost at the end, all right? So it's been a long one today, but one last section is just kind of talking about, based on your perspective and experiences with your team and how you've established your company, AcuDent, what are some of the skill sets and qualities you think make a good entrepreneur?
I think it's important in your question there, you said sets and qualities, plural. Because there's a whole lot of them.
Of course. Or what are some that stand out to you at least?
Stand out.
Like even in your team, you're like, wow, like if we didn't have that skill or that, archetypical feature in the group, maybe we wouldn't be as successful.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. So the first, I'll sort of skip on because I talked about it a little bit, perspective.
Yeah.
The second I'd say that's crucial is compassion.
In what way?
In the way that people have problems. People struggle. Yeah. And recognition not only of the problem, but how it can be approached or how it could be solved or how people can help or how maybe it shouldn't be solved, but how you can ease is extremely important. And I think that's been pinnacle to the culture that we have at AcuDent. It's a culture of we're people, we have our struggles, but how can we get through them as a team? How can we shift burden between people? If one person is struggling at the minute or they've got a lot on, they don't need to be doing the 20% equal split of work. Let's now shift that over to someone else. And I think that all comes down to compassion. Being able to communicate. I think that's almost so inherent that I don't need to say it.
Of course.
But
and also to understand using compassion that people communicate in different ways. Right, that's so important, especially when developing a team, communicating with the people on your team. They may not communicate the same way as you, and you have to acknowledge that. Right, because they may be dealing with things in different ways, and it may not come across to you as clear because you deal with things in different ways.
Yeah, no, completely. And that's a good way to put it. It's very much. It's just an awareness. Compassion's just an awareness. It doesn't mean you have to be there and you have to be soaping over the problem or giving them a pat on the shoulder all the time, because some people don't want that. It's an awareness that there could be a problem, and whether you're solving it or not, that you're aware of it and that you're not trying to make it any worse.
That's it.
And I'd say, like, these are people. Like my team at AcuDent, they're 4 people that I would happily work on any project with, not just AcuDent. And that's because they're good people.
That's it.
It's like none of us are the best at what we do in the world. There's no question of it. But we are brilliant at being people in a team who work together.
Which helps so much in a startup because of how hard it is to run a startup. Like people forget. It's like, okay, I have an idea, develop a product, whatever it may be. It's like, there's going to be so many ups and downs in that process. And if you don't have that team that's there to like support you and be compassionate with what you're experiencing as an individual, makes it like infinitely harder.
No, completely. It's all just like, I'm so grateful for the team. I could talk for another 20 hours about them alone. But we're all in different stages of our lives, just whether that's age or work or family related. And if we didn't have the compassion to work together as people, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess one last question then, which is, throughout your experiences and journey, what are some of the inherent sacrifices that you have had to make so far? And maybe some of the sacrifices that you can see on the horizon as someone who's now working, on their idea AcuDent?
Time and money. It's actually, I'm going to add one: time, money, and leisure. But I think it's a change in leisure. You sacrifice, just inherently over this year and into the future, you sacrifice the immediate pleasures of like just having a little bit more time to, say, play a game or go on this holiday then, or do that event or watch a movie. I haven't watched a movie in like half a year.
Yeah.
But it's because you've now grown this passion to do this other thing. So you're sacrificing an immediate leisure for a long-term leisure.
That's
what I'd say. But time and money.
Yeah.
There's a huge sacrifice in time, and then like money, startups, but with the hope of one day that it starts to go up.
Well, that's all it is, right? It's like delayed gratification. It's not going to just happen overnight. That's not how good things happen, right?
Yeah, you can't be risk averse in this space.
Absolutely.
Well, you can be a little bit risk averse, but it's all delayed gratification.
Yeah, that's it. All right, and one last thing I like to do before we wrap up is just ask the guests, like, what's one piece of advice based on your experiences that you kind of want to leave here on the Student Founder podcast?
One piece of advice. I'd say that the way you treat your team is everything.
Yeah.
Again, AcuDent, if we didn't have the idea, it's fine. If we didn't have the skill sets, it's fine. If we didn't have the time or the money, it's fine. But if we didn't treat each other right, we wouldn't be here. We've got it comes down to that. I'm harping on too much about team and culture, but my advice is find people you're happy to work with, regardless of the circumstance. It can be terrible, it can be great, but it's about having that communication, having those people you care about, and having a good team.
Very good, Liam. Very wholesome. You have a lot of humility to say things like that, so it's really good that you said that.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll wrap it up there. All right. Thanks so much for coming on to this episode of the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me and being a part of this community.
No, that's all right, man. Like I said, we're trying to build this community, right? So if you like this episode of the Student Founder podcast, make sure to like and subscribe. All the links will be in the description. I just want to reiterate that this episode wouldn't have been able to happen without our support from our company, Rofi Labs, which is a software development company that help companies establish their first MVPs and develop their apps, as well as fulfill resources using our expert and talented team of software developers. If this is something you want to learn more about, reach out to us on LinkedIn. Until next time, thank you so much. I'm Oliver. This is the Student Founder Podcast, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.